Well, hello everyone. This is Mark Turi, and welcome back to my channel for our Saturday evening, where I am, or afternoon, if you're in North America, where I will be presenting a PowerPoint presentation today about Russian minorities in the states of the former Soviet Union. And like always, I must, of course, say that if you have not liked this video yet, please give this a like. And also, if you not have yet subscribed to my channel, please subscribe because I would like to, of course, grow my channel. I have about 121, 122 followers right now, subscribers, which I think is great. I'm over 1,000 watch hours. I'm over, or I should say, over 1,000 views, and I'm over 250 watch hours. And of course, I'd like to expand that so in the future I can get monetized. And I do appreciate everyone who is here to support me. First of all, I just want to say hello to Clearwater Chad. Thank you, Clearwater Chad, for being here. You're awesome. You're always here. I enjoy, well, when you can, of course, which I enjoy. And I know this is you, so that's also a bonus. And yes, please, please, please like. If you can, please hit the like button. Please subscribe to my channel. Uh, Not only is Clearwater Chad one of my exalted few, but so is Joe Giuseppo, who is also an exalted few. I don't know if you even want to be, but that doesn't matter at this point. Irish Mart, a huge supporter of mine, who was here also on Wednesday. Thank you, Irish Mart, for coming back. Thank you for your continuing support. It's always good to see you here. And my buddy, my meme, Star Trek meme buddy, Shell. Shell, always a pleasure to see all of y'all here. I know that the hurricane has definitely dissipated, so I hope life has gone back to some kind of normal. I know in about 2.5 weeks you have a big election in the US. Doesn't matter to me who you're voting for, doesn't matter what party, what person you're supporting. I don't particularly care, but I'm always interested in the political culture around, especially US elections. In Canada, they're pretty boring, let's face it. Um, we have a small country, and so, it's one of those things. So I'm actually thinking about it because I'm a citizen of a couple countries. Um, I will probably not do a vote on what to do next Wednesday because I would actually like to talk next Wednesday about different voting systems. So, I vote in Hungary and I voted in Canada. And those are two very different systems of voting because in Canada we are a parliamentary democracy, whereas in Hungary we are a parliamentary republic. And it's a very different beast between those two countries. I also lived in America for 2.5 years, and so I know a little bit about American civics because I went to junior college and I actually had to take an American civics and American poli-sci course. So I'm going to sort of analyze the constitutional republic of the US mixed in with the parliamentary democracy of Canada, which is still a constitutional monarchy because we are under the King of England, and then the republic or the parliamentary republic of Hungary, which of course belongs to the EU. And I would like to do that next Wednesday. Okay, I think that would be fun. So again, this week we're going to talk about Russian minorities. Next week, however, we're also going to talk about the Twilight Zone, which is like one of my absolute favorite television programs of all time. I'm going to go through 6 of my favorite shows, and I use 6 because I thought 5 was too little and then 7 was too much and kind of a weird number. But I'm also going to give some of my other personal favorites. We're going to look at some of the cast, we're going to look at some of the plot, and I'm going to give you some background behind some of the actors and also, why I love the Twilight Zone and so forth. The week after that, I'll resume the poll. So we'll vote on something just before I guess it will be on November the, pardon me, let me see here. What's this schedule here? So November, this December. I'm getting way ahead of myself. On the 30th, I'm going to do the voting thing, and then on the 2nd, we're going to do of November, we're going to do the Twilight Zone. On the 5th, I'll put up a poll, and I'll do that actually probably after this, where I'll give you guys some options, and I'll give you some options, and I'll also maybe if I can do some suggestions as well. That's another thing I'd like to do. So if you have any suggestions of the things that I do on Wednesdays, which again is all free formed, opinion based, and more discussion led, let me know. That'll be on the 6th, and then on the 9th. I actually am finishing a PowerPoint on the 1848 revolution, which will be another a history presentation. So I've got it up until the middle of November. And then after that, I have a schedule change. So for just a very brief schedule change, but I'll let you know about that next week and the week after. I just want to go through here. Thank you so much. Here's Huckleberry, Pork Chop, Calhoun, School. It's good to see you. Thanks for being here. And Pete, thanks for being here, and thanks so much for commenting on my last one in the media. If you have any questions, you can plop them in here. I'll save them for later. But I'm glad. I hope everyone enjoyed that one. These were just things that I learned again as a journalism and media student, and this was before, of course, the age of now social media news. So if it felt like it was a little out of date, maybe it is because the last journalism course I took was in 2015. So that is a little bit maybe out of date, but I still think that there was at least some stuff in there that I thought would be helpful. So I hope that is true. And yeah, basically, it's been unseasonably warm here in Hungary. It was, let me look up the degrees because I have to always calculate for my American friends or our American friends here. So let me just see here. It was about, well, it was around 16 degrees Celsius today. So 16 degrees Celsius to Fahrenheit is 61 degrees. That was the high, and the low was about 10 degrees Celsius. So I guess that's maybe around 50, maybe just around there. So pretty unseasonable, actually. Usually it would be a little bit colder, but I think now that we're heading into November and certainly December, the average sort of temperature will go below zero, but anywhere from 2 below zero to 5 below zero. Power Lines is here. I got a lot of people here today. Geez Louise. I am so happy. I got a lot of my exalted few and my regulars here. Of course, uh, uh, in certain social structures, they have tiers. And in this case, we have no tiers. You're all a part of my exalted few. We have no elites, and we're all on the same level, except I am the source of all knowledge, at least in this channel. And Joe Giuseppe has already said that that's true, so therefore it's true. So she said it, so I don't look like an egotistical maniac. I just accept it like an egotistical maniac because it's a burden that has been put upon me. But I thank everyone. There's so many good names here. I'm so happy for that you guys are all here. This is really, really fun. Um, and so yeah, so it's like been unseasonably warm. For what reason? Climate change, which is going to kill us all. I'm sure it will. It's absolutely insane and real and crazy and whatever. But what can we do other than passing laws and listening to science? But that's a bit too much. That's too much of my own commentary on that subject. So I will divert. Um, about almost around 10 after, so I just want to set up my PowerPoint for today. It's one of these situations where I'm talking about, Russian minorities within the former Soviet Union, and we obviously have had the horrific Russian-Ukrainian war since 2022. You know, everyone's going to have a side. I have a side on this issue, but I'm not trying to link anything to do with that particular war. The purpose of this, you know, presentation goes back to something that again I can also do in the future, which is what happens when Russian, or excuse me, not Russian, pardon me, in this case Russian, but when ethnic majorities in a particular empire or a large nation, when that large nation loses a war or becomes dissolved, what happens when those majorities find themselves as minorities in either new states or other states? And for example, I will do one probably in November about Hungarian minorities that ended up in Czechoslovakia, the USSR, of course, Romania and Yugoslavia, as well as Austria after the Treaty of Trianon, which is roughly around 1920, 1921. Because part of what I'm looking at now in my new thesis is how Hungarians, Jews, and Romanians were getting along in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, specifically from the 1880s until 1914. So ethnic relations amongst Jews and non-Jews, ethnic Hungarians, ethnic Romanians, as well as even Ukrainians and Poles and so forth, is something that I am interested in. It's one of the many things I'm interested in because I'm also interested in the history of nationalism and the history of revolutions, particularly in the 19th century. And as I've mentioned before, my most broad interest is Central Europe in the late modern era, and there's a lot going on in that era. So I probably will do, maybe let's say in a month from now, maybe 3 weeks from now, I'll do something like that on Hungarian minorities. But the same could be said for the German minorities that ended up in Czechoslovakia, and Poland after World War One, and so on. So this is just an interest of mine. Please note, whatever views you hold, even though I might disagree, I'm not going to shame you for them. As I said, I like to try to be as accountable as possible. So my honest opinions will be that I do think that there could be some more, and I hope not, but more skirmishes or battles or wars in the future regarding Russian ethnic minorities, as we saw in Ukraine. But my hope is that, of course, there'll be some kind of solution that will be more peaceful. I say that as a, naive, idealistic Canadian who's living in Hungary, where people are mostly pessimistic, although I am also kind of cynical in some ways. That's just my hope. So that's it. So now we're going to get to, again, a brief introduction on why I chose this topic. And it's something that I wish that I had done a little while ago. So, when I was an undergrad, I was always a point in some of my seminars where we had to do a presentation at the end of the seminar. And I remember, I think it was for a course on nationalism, actually, where I could have discussed this or another topic, and I picked the other topic, and the other topic didn't turn out that well, even though it was something I was really passionate about. So I felt like, hey, I started thinking about Russian, ethnic Russian minorities, and then I saw a video from a YouTuber called The Bald and the Bankrupt, who I really like. He's English. He's from the UK. He's from Brighton. His name is Benjamin, and he actually went to a particular city in Estonia, which I'm going to talk to you about in just a moment. And that again sparked my interest, as well as some other things like speaking to people from Moldova. And if you know what I'm talking about in Moldova, it's a spoiler alert for a breakaway state. So just before I get into this, I'm going to go through the chat just to see here. All hail Mark. Thank you. I prefer man's best friend because that's what Scientologists call Hubbard. 85 or 29 in Florida. Woo! In almost November. Yikes. Whew. Yep, don't mess with the USR. Don't come around, the commissar's in town. Whew, all right. My German ancestors who spoke Low German migrated from Kiev. Yeah, there were before, of course, another thing to say is with the German ethnic population, around 1945, there was this massive expulsion of a couple million ethnic Germans who lived in Central and Eastern Europe. In Hungary, there was a massive German-speaking community in the southwest near a city called Pécs. There was also a community in just the west of here of Budapest, and also near the border in a city called Sopron, and a couple little German enclaves. Romania had quite a few. The city of Sibiu was a big Transylvanian Saxon community. Slovakia, Ukraine, and especially also Riga, Estonia, Wrocław in Poland, and so forth, and they were expelled. And so about 2 to 3 million people came back. And right now, if you do travel to Romania, which I did a couple of years ago, I went to CBU. There's only Germans who are pensioners, and a pensioner for our American and Canadian friends means someone over the age of 65 who's collecting Social Security or social insurance, right? They're collecting their pensions. And because Romania is so cheap, they've moved to the outskirts, and there's a small German community. So the ethnic Germans who are from Germany have retired and sort of reclaimed this kind of outskirts of CBU, and it's become a German enclave. And there's actually a ton of German restaurants and German bookshops that have opened up in town because of these pensioners. So maybe there'll be another another German, community there. 78 degrees in California. Oh God, love California. I haven't been in 5 years with men. Okay, anywho, I don't want to reminisce about tacos and sopes, burritos, Baja Fresh, La Salsa, Tito's Tacos, a Pollo Loco, In-N-Out Burgers. Anywho, wish we had that stuff here. Okay, I'm going to share my, or not share my screen. I'm going to get my slides going here. Add my slides, and I'm going to go to full screen, which means that periodically I'll be checking the chat because I can't see it when I am on full screen. But here we go with Russian minorities in the states of the former Soviet Union. Before we even get to talking about Russian minorities, I just want to give a very brief background of the Soviet Union. This is going to be very, very brief and very basic, of course. I could do a whole other presentation, which maybe I should do on the Russian Revolution of October 1917 and the development of Lenin and the Russian Civil War, which I could do again also in November. But the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics began its life in 1922, and its first leader was, of course, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, which I've discussed a couple times also in my, particularly in the what happened when the revolution didn't happen live, and then also we talked about him in the first part of my German Revolution because I mentioned the October Revolution. I showed a picture of Lenin. And of course, it would dissolve itself in 1991 after about a decade or more of just very bad economic crises and also economic reforms like glasnost, the war in Afghanistan that did not go well for the Soviets and so forth, lots of other factors, of course, including the Berlin Wall falling, the breakup of Soviet Union, declaring of independence of Hungary and Poland and whatnot. But I wanted to show you a map today of not only of all of the states, all of the now independent states of the Soviet Union. And I do have to apologize because when uploading this, there was a bit of a cutoff right in the top. But right in the top left, there's like a blue color. It says Baltic republics. And those, of course, are the republics of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. The next is a yellow color. They are the Caucasus, or the Caucasus republics of Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. Next to that is, I guess, like a turquoise color or a dark blue color. It says Central Asia. We have Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. And then in purple, we have disputed territories, including Crimea, which was annexed by Russia in 2014. We have Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which are pro-Russian backed breakaway republics in Georgia, and a disputed territory that there was a war in the early 90s following the breakup of the Soviet Union, and an area called Nagorno-Karabakh, which is split between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And in fact, there are still border skirmishes and conflicts and disputed territories in that area even to this day, which did flare up within the past couple of years. And I'll be getting into and touching on those in one moment. First thing we're going to talk about, though, are the Baltic states. I mentioned before here, we have a graph on ethnic Russian minority groups in the Baltic states. On top is the country of Estonia, capital is Tallinn. In the middle is the country of Latvia, its capital is Riga. And at the very bottom is the country of Lithuania, its capital is Vilnius. Interesting just to note that Tallinn and Riga at one point were very German cities, and Vilnius was actually part of Poland and was actually a Polish-speaking country. But in modern times, they had a lot of population back and forths, and so Tallinn now is mostly Estonian, Riga is mostly Latvian, and Vilnius, of course, is mostly Lithuanian. But historically, this area had also been colonized by Sweden, by the Teutonic Knights, by the Germans, both in World War I and II, and also had lots of influence from Finland, from Russia, Tsarist Russia, the Soviet Union, Poland, and many others. So this area also in the Middle Ages was subjected to what they call the Baltic Pagan Crusades, in which the Teutonic Knights came in and forced this area of the Baltic states, which were the final area of Europe that still had paganism, and they were forcibly converted. Estonia and Latvia would then join the Lutheran Church, which would be very similar to northern Germany and Scandinavia. And then, of course, Lithuania, excuse me. So Estonia and Latvia are mostly Lutheran. Lithuania, on the other hand, is mostly Roman Catholic, and they had a union with Poland. And they had the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth for many years. If we look at this graph at the top left of this image, we'll see colors of blue that go, from white to light blue all the way to dark blue. And you're going to notice that the most darkest and the most bluest is in northeastern Estonia. I'm going to reference again The Bald and the Bankrupt, this gentleman named Benjamin, who travels throughout the world. He's traveled to a lot of former Soviet Union nations. And this blue area is called the county, and there's a city within that county called Narva, Naarva, Narva, okay? The Narva city and the Narva county are at least somewhere between 70 to about 95, 98% Russian. So the county is around 70, 75% Russian, and the city is anywhere from 95 to 98% Russian. And what's extremely interesting about this, of course, it shares a border with Russia. There's a river a border, but that the people here do not use Estonian. even in some administrative usages. So, for example, they use the ruble as their currency. If you go to a newsstand, they sell Russian newspapers, which of course are noted for having the Cyrillic alphabet. They consume Russian state media, television, films, radio, internet, everything. This place is basically Russia. And for at least the most part, there has been some peace because there hasn't really been any uprisings. But it seems to be very much an ethnic Russian enclave where, you know, this area, this Narva County, is just dominated with Russian speakers, Russian culture, Russian media, Russian religion. As I mentioned, Estonians are mostly evangelical Lutherans, okay, like the Finns and Swedes and so forth. But, there's mostly Orthodox churches, Russian Orthodox churches. You can also see that there are pockets of light blue around Narva. So that's usually means that there's around maybe 20 to 30, 40% ethnic Russians in that area. So it's a very peculiar and interesting thing. And if you're interested, if you go to Baldwin the Bankrupt, you just look up his Narva video and you can see people. And one of the things that he did is this YouTuber went to different areas around Narva within Narva County that used to be quite active during the Soviet era. Okay, there's a couple of other villages that he and towns that he goes to where again everyone speaks Russian, everyone's ethnically Russian, and he will ask people, especially older generation, was it better today or under the Soviet Union? And you will get a taste for what is called historical nostalgia, which I mentioned when I talked about Yugoslavia. If we look at the country of Latvia, in 1991 and in the very early 90s, Latvia, Latvia's population, 34%, I should say, of Latvia's population at that time were ethnic Russians. It was one of the most dense, as far as percentages are concerned, of ethnic Russians within the former Soviet republics. It's lower today, and I'll get into percentages in a moment, but you can still see here on the eastern periphery of the border between Lithuania, Latvia, Russia, and Belarus, that there are still predominant cities and where at least half, if not a little more, are still ethnically Russian, and especially around Riga, where it gets to around 30-40% as well. So it's still pretty much has a pretty heavy ethnic Russian minority. The last one is Lithuania. Lithuania is in a very interesting position, which a precarious geographical position, which I'll get into again in a moment. But it borders to the east on Belarus, and so far it does have Russian, minorities. But you can also see on this map the border of Belarus to the border of Latvia and Belarus. It's maybe at 20%, and those are only in some counties. Most are Latvian. There's some Polish and Latvian, of course, crossover and minorities, but mostly of the Baltic states, it sits at the least of all as far as Russian minorities within the Baltics. But this is where Lithuania has its very precarious position. So we can see here more clearly where Belarus comes in. Belarus is considered to be Europe's last dictatorship. They have had one single leader named Alexander Lukashenko since 1991, and he is very much backed by Russia. In fact, around 80% of Belarusians speak Russian and again have a very Russian dominant culture, whereas the actual native language should be Belarusian, and only around 20% of Belarusians speak Belarusian. although there is a revival going on, there has been some government suppression and so on. And we see here which is called the Suwalki Gap, which is a small area between Belarus and a very interesting and peculiar enclave on the Baltic Sea that is a part of Russia. So, for anyone who knows, again, any history about Germany and especially about Prussia, will know that this area, which is referred to as the Kaliningrad Oblast, was once known as the German East Prussian city of Königsberg, home of Immanuel Kant and many others. In World War I, for those who remember the map when Poland became a country, there was something called the Polish Corridor, which separated the city of Danzig and some area to the west of it, and separated East Prussia from the rest of Germany, which would be the north of Berlin, which is called Mecklenburg and Pomerania. In the Second World War, Königsberg, of course, was liberated, you could say, or invaded, whichever word you want to use, by the Soviet Union and the Red Army. I mentioned to you the German expulsions. Well, the East Prussians in Königsberg mostly left, the ethnic Germans left that area of Königsberg at the time, due to the fact that the Soviets were, of course, slaughtering a lot of ethnic Germans. And it's also where the Nazis had a lot of their naval uh, uh, installations. So in 1945, the area became predominantly Russian. They had the Soviet and now Russian Navy is stationed at the Baltic Fleet anyway, is stationed in Kaliningrad. And then in 1991, when the Soviet Union was dissolving, Kaliningrad, May had gone, at least there was some discussion on whether Kaliningrad should go to Lithuania or Poland. The problem was that they were not going to then make any more population swaps or expulsions of the ethnic Russians who had been the majority in this area. And so neither Lithuania nor Poland wanted to accept the area because of its massively large Russian population. And so it became kind of an anomaly. And now the Kaliningrad Oblast is what we call an enclave because it borders on water. If it was, for example, surrounded by surrounded by Lithuania, surrounded by Poland, and it looked like an island within a nation, which I'm going to show you especially when we get to Armenia and Azerbaijan, that is called an enclave. That's called an exclave, I believe. It's called an exclave, and this one's called an enclave. Someone can maybe correct me, but I'm pretty sure this is called an enclave, and the exclave is when they're surrounded. Anyway, the point just being that this is still a part of Russia, and it has an overwhelmingly majority ethnic Russian population who displaced the overwhelming German population in 1945. So here we go in terms of percentages, roughly to today. I want to make note that I'm going to show you another chart right after this where we have census data, and the census data takes us all the way from like 2001 or something, all at the earliest, all the way to 2022, 2023. So none of this is really like massively huge, and can obviously, be looked at in different ways. So if we look at it now, I talked about Estonia. So almost a quarter of Estonians' population are Russian. So 1 out of every 4 Estonians living in Estonia is an ethnic Russian. It's roughly the same in Latvia, right? It says here 26.2. So if we round that to about a quarter, 1 out of every 4 Latvians living today in Latvia are, of course, Russians. We then have Lithuania at around 5.8, so a smaller number, and Belarus still has 8.3% Russians. I'm going to skip Ukraine just for now because that statistic is a little bit older. But I did forget to mention Moldova, and of course that was not intentional. Moldova was just left out of the first map for no reasons of malice. It just didn't appear on that particular map. But I am going to talk about a breakaway state within Moldova in just a few moments because it is very crucial and very important because it's a very, very much an anomaly that is very interesting. But also, please note that it says 5.9% of the Moldovan population are ethnically Russians. It notes here that 58% of Crimeans were Russian. When we get to the Caucasus states, there's a bit less, 1.5% in Georgia, 0.5% in Armenia, and 1.3% in Azerbaijan. We get to Central Asia, we have a mix here. The highest, of course, 23.7 in Kazakhstan, which is again almost a quarter. 12.5 in Kyrgyzstan, quite a lot there. 5.5 Uzbekistan, 4% in Turkmenistan, and then 1.1 in Tajikistan. So there still are quite a bit of, ethnic Russians around. I am going to just pause for 1 second and look up here, back to our thing here. Does Russian history, does brief Russian history mean the same as Putin's explanation to Tucker Carlson? No, I'm much smarter than both of them, but you didn't hear that from me. Friend dated and married a woman from Kyrgyzstan. He went back and met the family. I have an ethnic hat. Oh, yes, it's made from goat. Yep, goat hair. They honored him by giving him, yes, exactly, yes, with the dinner. Yeah, yep, absolutely. That version of history is right up there with the history of Bill O'Reilly, Vaughn. It's up, yeah. I know. The killing of Lincoln, the killing of this, the killing of that. Don't read that crap. Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in the early modern era was one of the biggest safe havens for Jews. And that's why a lot of what we call Hasidic dynasties come from places like Kiev, Krakow, Białystok, Vilnius, even Riga, which is a different thing. But you'll notice also in parts of Western Ukraine, Eastern Poland, Southern Poland, and Lithuania, you find a lot of Hasidic people, and that's where the Hasidic, because Hasidism is actually, although considered orthodox, it's actually considered pre-modern because it's a set of mystical teachings and so forth. And a lot of them originated from the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Then, of course, by 1795, it was split. The western part went to Prussia, the eastern part went to Russia, and then the southern part went to Austria. And then Poland wasn't a nation until 123 years later, until 1918. Yes, bald and bankrupt, controversial bloke for what he gets up to off camera. I don't know anything about that. I'm sure I mean, he's been arrested and stuff, done stupid stuff in Kazakhstan, but you can tell me more. You can tell me more. I find him to be funny. And he actually did go to, just before the war broke out, he made it very close. So he's done some really interesting stuff as well. And he speaks Russian. So there you go. Just look that up. Yikes. Yeah, let me know what he did. I'm sure I can't. All I say is I watch his content every once in a while because I think it's interesting, but maybe he's a wanker, so to speak, because Joe knows that's my favorite English word. If he is, then just let me know. Yep, Białystok is the birthplace of Esperanto. Really? Okay, so I guess Zamenhof was from there. He was Jewish, so that makes sense if he was from that area. All right, back to full screen again. And we're going to go through a Wikipedia chart, this table here where we get census data. And that's the first place I want to start, is looking at the census data. So, from Ukraine, which I know is, back in this horrible war, the census data only goes back to 2001, whereas it looks like from Kazakhstan, Latvia, Estonia, Kyrgyzstan, Lithuania, Um, and then is the most recent, and then pretty recent is Azerbaijan, um, Tajikistan, and Armenia. So there's some that's a little bit out of date again, like Turkmenistan is over a decade old. So is Georgia, but relatively, and Belarus is fairly recent. But if we look at percentage-wise, so we look at numbers, it looks like over 8 million ethnic Russians in Ukraine, around 17.3% of the total population. That's also when Crimea and Luhansk and Donetsk, and now the Russian occupied areas and the Russian annexed areas, were apart. So I don't know how many million people live in east and southeastern Ukraine, as well as, or formerly East and Southeastern Ukraine, I guess, and Crimea, which are, I guess, now occupied and annexed by Russia. I don't know how many millions of Russians live there, but this number, 8 million, would be lower. Almost 3 million in Kazakhstan, almost 15%, 700,000, over 700,000 in both Uzbekistan, Belarus, 437,000 Latvia, although 200, and almost 300,000 in Estonia. I mentioned the one area that has quite a substantial amount. Kyrgyzstan, over a quarter million. Turkmenistan, almost a quarter million. Latvia, Moldova, over 100,000. And then Azerbaijan, 71,000. Tajikistan, 30,200. Georgia, about 26,000. And Armenia, just over 14,000. So quite a few. And as I said, one of the things I wanted to mention too was Kazakhstan. So Kazakhstan, in many of their major cities, do have a very large Russian minority, and they are connected to Russia. A couple of years back, I think now it's been at least a year or two, there were strikes from factory workers and farmers and a bunch of other workers in Kazakhstan. And in order to thwart the strikes, the government of Kazakhstan actually asked the Russian government and military to come in and stop them, and they did send like APCs, armored personnel carriers, to stop that. So Belarus is Russian-backed, uh, and Kazakhstan is certainly Russian-backed, and quite a few of these areas are Russian-backed. Although there are quite a few places that want to sort of separate more of themselves from Russia, specifically Azerbaijan, who's becoming closer to Turkey, and then like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania becoming closer to NATO and the EU. And of course, Georgia is in a precarious position as well. Same with Armenia. And Tajikistan is also pretty interesting. Tajikistan, of course, is a majority Muslim country, like all of the Central Asian countries. But in order to, according to them anyway, to thwart the effort of Islamic fundamentalism, men are not allowed to grow long beards, and they have other kind of more secular versions of their Islam to curtail some of those issues. And again, very interesting part of the world. I would love to go to these places because I love Central Asian culture. And although I don't eat a lot of meat, I think when in Rome, I might partake, although I probably can't get kosher mutton. But, I have to say, I do love me some Central Asian food and culture. Here now we're going to get to breakaway states. And before I do that, so breakaway states and things like this. Okay. Well, I mentioned Moldova. And Moldova, of course, and I also mentioned this on my history of Romania and my history of the Romanian language, both of which I shared, I think, last year in Nerdy Bunch presentations, which are on this channel. Moldova was actually known as Bessarabia, and today Bessarabia is mostly Moldova, but the northern part and the southern part are part of Ukraine. It was then, of course, went back and forth being annexed between the Soviets and Romania. But after World War II, it became part of the Soviet Union. I got a lot of debate because my most watched video is on my history of the Romanian language, where I mentioned the Moldovan language, and a lot of Romanians detest that. I've been told that saying the Moldovan language is just for ethnic Russians who want to sort of separate it. Again, lots of politics, so I'm not going to get into it. But regardless, whether there is a Moldovan language or not, doesn't matter. It's Romanian, whatever. I know it's historically a part of Romania. There's effort has been efforts to make Moldova incorporated into modern Romania, but there is a part of modern Moldova that is predominantly Russian, and it is known as the Republic of Transnistria. And this is its flag, which you can see has a star, red star, and a hammer and a sickle. So the majority of the people in this territory, okay, which is in the east part of Moldova, and I will show a picture of that in a moment, are Russian. They have their own president, which they elect, and they have their own separate passport, which I don't believe is recognized by anybody. When you go there, you're not, in Moldova, although technically you are because it's a disputed territory. However, they will say they're not Moldovan citizens. They don't want to be. They're Transnistrians and they're Russian. Russian is the state language, and just like Narva, they use rubles. Their press, their communication, their government, everything is conversed with the lingua franca of the Russian language in media and education and so forth. However, it is not formally or internationally recognized by any international organization, including the UN and so forth. So it is a state that broke away, that declared its independence, that has its own president, its own passport, but on paper, it is still a part of Moldova, even though they think of themselves differently and obviously have carved out their own flag and their own history and their own culture. And this is what it looks like. If you see, we have Moldova, which is in the western part, which is in the lighter color. The darker color here, sort of like I guess a darker yellowish color, is Transnistria. You can see a very small, a sort of sliver, small sliver, very large when it goes to north and south, but very, very thin when it comes to east and west. And its capital here is called Tiraspol. And that's in fact the capital city. And you can go there, you can be admitted there. I'm not sure who needs or doesn't need a visa, but it is possible to get there. At least I think you can fly there, drive there. And yes, Baldwin the bankrupt, and maybe he's not a good person, I don't know, but he has been to this place as well as many other individuals have also gone there. And again, according to them, it's very reminiscent of the Soviet Union and very, very Russian. Before I go on to Georgia, let me just see if there's any other comments here. Marco says Transnistria, well, never heard. Yep, that's pretty cool, isn't it? It's interesting. And again, go to YouTube and just type in Transnistria, Tiraspol, and you'll see tourist videos. I mean, again, I know people can go there. I forget how you get there. I don't know if you can drive there. Maybe you can. I'm not sure. I think they have a border checkpoint. You probably fly there, but there's some interesting things going on in that area of the world. And again, it's like a very sort of thin thin but long type of nation. So now we get to Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, which again is another breakaway country. Georgia is known for many, many things: delicious food, mountains. It's the birthplace of Joseph Stalin, which they don't really probably like me saying, but it is. And it is also some post-Soviet separatism. So again, right after 1991, there are these two provinces, I guess, or states within Georgia that are considered autonomous republics that are Russian backed. The first is on the coast of the Black Sea in the northwest, and it's called Abkhazia. And the one in the center is called South Ossetia. Just to note that these two breakaway states are not only different from themselves, but ethnically they're different from Georgians. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, someone can check this up. I don't know if the South Ossetians are Muslim. I think they actually might be Orthodox Christians. Certainly the Georgians are, and I think the Abkhazians are also Orthodox Christians. Abkhazians are closely related in their language to the Circassian people, which underwent an ethnic cleansing and genocide in the 19th century by Tsarist Russia. And then the South Ossetians speak an Indo-Iranian language. I mentioned also this when I talked about the history of the Hungarian language. North Ossetia today is part of Russia. South Ossetia is part of Georgia. They're two breakaway states. They're both backed by Georgia, backed by Russia, excuse me. And in 2008, Russia actually did invade Georgia in order to quote unquote protect, South Ossetia. The border along South Ossetia has been changing. There's also videos about that that you can find on the border between Georgia and South Ossetia, including the fact that certain towns have been cut in half and certain people that would have access to certain resources now find churches and supermarkets and highways on the Russian side, which they can't go to. And so it's definitely a disputed area. So these nations are always in dispute, and so I think they are considered autonomous republics. They are not at least officially recognized as independent nations by Georgia, but they are Russian backed. And I also believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the only countries, yes, the only nations on earth, if they are nations on earth that support Transnistria, is Abkhazia and South Ossetia. So they're not internationally recognized, but they are recognized by these two breakaway states. Finally, we have this, well, not finally, I've got one more after this. But when we come to the Caucasus, this is the second last because there's another Caucasus conflict in a moment. And this one has actually been in the news quite a lot within the past 3 to 5 years. And of course, doesn't get much international coverage, but it is very interesting. And this is the Azerbaijani Armenian border conflict. Again, similar to what happened in Georgia in 1991, right about to the middle of the 90s, there was a border war between Armenia and Azerbaijan in the area of what is called Nagorno-Karabakh. I will get to that in a moment. And since then, there's been a lot of back and forth between this region. So if you look at the border between Azerbaijan and Armenia, it is kind of a mess. The first is, if you notice in the south, there is this, well, I guess what we call an exclave called the Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic. It had been ceded to Armenia. And then in the 90s, because it's majority ethnic Azerbaijani, it became a part of Azerbaijan. You might think that this looks a little weird. Just to note, the southern border of both of these nations border on Iran. And in all of this particular area of Iran are predominantly what are called Azeri peoples. So the Azerbaijanis are, from what I understand, and I stand corrected if I'm wrong on this, but the Azerbaijanis are a nationality. The ethnicity is Azeri, and then there are many, many Azeris that ended up in Iran, and they are called Azeri Iranians. So while it might look strange, just note that the entire southern border that is bordered here of Iran is majority Azeris. And so this separate autonomous republic is actually linked through the Iranian Azeri area. If we look at Armenia and we look at Azerbaijan, we're going to see a couple of different also exclaves. If you want to look at Google Maps, there's a lot more going on. But if we look here, and they're a little bit small, so if you don't see them, it's okay. But if we look at where the word Armenia is, right where the A is, you'll see what looks like a gray dot. Okay. If we then go a little bit north and you see the town of Tovuz, which there were, it says here, recent clashes, and you look a little bit to the left, you'll see a yellow dot. So these again are these ethnic islands, which there are quite a few of them between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So what this means is where there is a yellow dot within a gray sea, although the country of Armenia is surrounding one town or one small community of ethnic Azerbaijanis and or Azeris. The dot of gray that's around the final A in Armenia is, of course, again, an ethnic Armenian town surrounded by the state of Azerbaijan. And then, they're not a part of the surrounding area. They are actually part of Armenia if it's gray, and the yellow is a part of Azerbaijan. And again, I want to mention that there are plenty of these, I believe they're called exclaves that exist along this border. So that means that if you're at the border, you might travel 2 or 3 miles, you get to an ethnic fill in the blank, and then you're only there for a couple miles in each direction, and then you're part of another country. But what really is the big area of conflict is this area called the Nagorno-Karabakh, because this entire orange area is an autonomous republic of predominantly ethnic Armenians that ended up in Azerbaijan following the wars in the 90s. And it says here that the brown area was the attempt by Armenia to seize control of Azerbaijan territory to bring this Nagorno-Karabakh closer to Armenia. And there have been a lot of border skirmishes, again, within the past couple of years, based on this. And it's a lot of it because if you were close to the border of Armenia, but this one town was, only and fully Azerbaijani. You were part of Azerbaijan, but you were separate from the mainland, and so on and so on. So this is a conflict that has been really troubling. And another troubling aspect this is of its geopolitics. If you ask a lot of Azerbaijanis, and again, just because I've spoken to a few doesn't mean I've spoken to all of them, but many in Azerbaijan will say that Armenia is fighting a proxy war, that on their side is Russia and Georgia, which of course are Christians. And, they don't care for the fact that Azerbaijan is Muslims. And of course, according to Armenia, this is, Azerbaijan wants to expand. And they say that the Azerbaijanis have Iran and Turkey on their side. Then they believe that these are fighting sort of proxy wars. I don't know what the truth is. I just know the basics of this conflict. It's a very tragic one, especially for the civilian populations that find themselves in a village of that's surrounded by a country that they don't belong to, and an army will move in and try to take over the village, and then the other army comes in and liberates them, and then has gone back and forth and back and forth. So it's very tragic again, and whether this is really a proxy war, a border war, a skirmish, it's still pretty bad and pretty horrific. And of course, we always hope for some kind of peaceful solution. But with the border being what it is, it's quite an issue, and it's quite a problem. Finally, I just want to touch on this because I'm not an expert, but the North Caucasus now, we're in the North Caucasus, have been a troubling, region, of course, for Russia. And I wanted to touch here on the war in Chechnya, which again was a breakaway state that, following the dismantling of the Soviet Union, they did declare its independence, and at least for a few years, I believe it was between 96 and 99, actually, I think was somewhat independent. I'm not exactly sure the status of that, but we can see here that there was 2 wars in Chechnya. The first one was between December 94, August 96, and then the second war between August 99 and April 2000, in which at the end Russia won and reincorporated Chechnya as a republic within the Russian Federation. What is very, very interesting, and now that I have some Russian friends and colleagues, um, is the culture. If anybody goes to Grozny, for example, it's very much the opposite of what I mentioned. Pardon me. Of the rules in Tajikistan. I mentioned in Tajikistan, you can't really have a long beard, and there's certain things that they want to curtail what they say is Islamic fundamentalism. Whereas in Chechnya, even for tourists, men have to wear pants and long sleeve shirts. You don't have to have a beard if you're a tourist, but they encourage it. And women also have to dress modestly, so no shorts at all. So even in the summer when it's really hot, men and women are expected, women are expected to be more um, modest. So usually skirts or long pants or something, black head coverings, and that's I have friends who are ethnically Russian who have been to Grozny, and they basically say it's a lot more like the Middle East. But what's very interesting is that the Chechens speak what they call a Caucasian language. They write in the Arabic script, but their language is night and day from not only from Georgian or from Azerbaijani or whatever, night and day from Arabic and so forth. Even though it does have a lot of Arabic influence. And so it's very interesting. And this is my last slide because, like that's, just the tip of the iceberg. There's also a lot of Turkic peoples. About 3.5% of the Russian Federation are Tartars, Bashkirs, Tuvans, Chuvash. There's the Uralic peoples that I mentioned in my Hungarian. Got the Komi, the Mansi, the Khanty, the Karelians, and then of course so many others. It's actually incredibly diverse ethnically. And even though Russian is the lingua franca and replacing a lot of the Uralic and Turkic languages and so forth, it's still extremely diverse. And yet we don't know if the ethnic what the geopolitics and if there will be or won't be any ethnic conflicts in the Baltic states in the future, just like there was in Ukraine. Obviously, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, their border was on high alert during the Ukrainian war and still is. The US has moved into the Baltic states. The US also has now a base in Poland because Poland, of course, borders on Belarus and Lithuania. I do want to mention, and I forget her name, I apologize, but Belarus had an election a couple years back, I think either last year or the year before, and there was a young woman, a mother of, I think, two, Svetlana, I forget her last name, please forgive me, and she won the election. It was contested by Lukashenko, and she went into exile, and I believe she's now living in Lithuania. And if I'm not mistaken, because the end of this documentary stated that her husband was arrested. So it's a lot. And, I hope that this can be contained. Joe says, if you like Georgian music like me, check out Mandili. Trio Mandili. I also love some, what is it called? Khachapuri. I think I know what that is, and yes, they are amazing. The Azeris are split between Iran and former Soviet Azerbaijan after the war between Iran and the Russian Empire in the 19th century. The treaty split Russian Azerbaijan and Iranian southern Azerbaijan. Thank you. Azeri, of course, is a Turkic language, closely related to Turkish, hence the close links and politically since Soviet times. I do know someone when I was in college who was Turkish. He said that when Turkish people go to Baku or Azerbaijan, if they go there in the morning, by the end of the night, they can pretty much understand Azeri because Azeri still has old words that were never reformed after the 1920s. But when Azeris travel to Turkey, they're almost fluent. They just because they consume a lot of Turkish media since it's a bigger country. And that's also very similar to Finns and Estonians. Finns need to go to Estonia and get acclimatized a little bit. But when Estonians go to Finland, they pretty much understand because they consume the media. So I think it's interesting. And yes, it is. Please forgive me. I'm going to try to pronounce now. So it's Biatlana Tikanushkaya. That is her name. I think it's called The Accidental President. That is what it's called, The Accidental President. I watched it on HBO Max. It's very interesting. There's a lot more details. So, yeah, thank you very much. Now, before I leave you, you know, I guess the commentary part of this, which I try not to keep out of, is just you have to hope that these things don't escalate. And it's really interesting how our media, the media in our countries, especially in the English speaking world, I mean, they should be focusing on what's going on in Ukraine, but it's also something that, like, what's going on between Armenia and Azerbaijan is pretty devastating. And it's not really widely reported. I only really found out about it from Armenian friends that I knew. And just recently, um, there are some international students who have come from Azerbaijan who want to talk about it, and of course they have varying opinions. Some are more pro-government, some are more pro whatever, skeptical and whatever. But really, that's how I knew about it, and I like to think that I have the thumb on the pulse of international geopolitics, but I'm one person. I don't really have a lot of that knowledge. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, like, I remember the war from 94. Like, I remember that war." And between those 2 countries, it really hasn't been settled since that time. So I remember learning about this in high school in, like, the late '90s and learning about the dissolution of the Soviet Union and all these sort of squirrels, and then nothing since then, right? Like, really not much since then. And then once the war in Ukraine happened and so forth, then, people are talking about it a little more. But, like, really, it's very interesting. And please, I'm not the final word on any of this. I hope I've inspired you to look up, travel videos, destination videos to places like Transnistria, certainly a very interesting culture. You can look up travel videos to Narva, Estonia. You can look at EU exercises in places like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. You can look up again at the American base that's being constructed now. I believe it's an American Army base that's in Poland right now. And you can look up between pro-Soviet, or excuse me, pro-Russian nations like Belarus, arguably Armenia, although I don't know if Armenia is pro-Russian anymore. I'm not sure, but definitely also what happened last year in Kazakhstan, which again they get reported, but then the news cycle just the way it is, they sort of fall out within a couple of days or even hours, and they're just very interesting. So I can't commentate other than that. I'm not an expert in geopolitics, but again, my expertise is more ethnic relations and sort of former empires and nationalism. And I think in a few weeks maybe we'll do ethnic Hungarian relations in the former, Kingdom of Hungary, which I think might be interesting for all of you all to look at as well. So let me look to see here if I uh, have left anybody out or forgot anything here. Thank you again, Clearwater Chad. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Irish. Thank you, Shell. It's great to see you. Thank you, Huckleberry. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Power Lines. I mean, we got a great people here today. It's amazing. I'm so glad. A lot of my exalted are here, and I appreciate it so much. Huckleberry, thanks for such a great show, Mark. I really enjoyed learning about different focus than my own. Fisheries, yeah, can be geopolitical, yes, and and that isn't mine, yeah. Yeah, man, I will probably in the future because I did a class on the economic history of Africa. And boy, is that one something. Rubber, zinc, cobalt, gold, diamonds. I'll probably save that one for the future. But also, when we talk about fishing, uh, between China, Japan, and Korea is a lot of maritime laws and drawing and redrawing of maritime borders and disputes going on that area of the world. So anyway, thank you, everyone. Again, if you have not liked this video yet, please do so right now before you go. If for any reason you haven't subscribed to my channel and you enjoy my content like what we do now, please subscribe. Please look at my other lives. I've done a myriad of topics: politics, philosophy, history, religion, and so much. My Wednesdays, as I like to say, Wednesday lives are usually commentaries and discussions, and I like to do more lecture based on Saturday, like now. So if you enjoy them, please consider subscribing to me. We've had quite a few people on tonight. That's amazing. I'm glad that there's a lot of people here. This will probably one of my highest live counts. So I'm so appreciative of that. Thank you for spending an hour with me. Of all the things you could be doing, I'm glad you're here with me. So to all my friends out there, to all my followers, good morning. Well, in case I don't see you, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and good night.